In this video, we're going to talk about restoring symmetry that's been lost in the process of sculpting. A very common problem that new users have in ZBrush is at some point they might lose their symmetry. So here we've got the Hellhound model. If I turn on the floor plane, you can see that he is standing and straddling the origin. Let's go ahead and turn up our subdivision levels to the top level. Now, as you're working on this, you might, for example, if you have the gizmo open, you might accidentally move something off just like that. And if you're zoomed in, you might not notice that you've done it. It can happen if you accidentally grab a corner like that, for example. You'll be working and then you come back and you're like, oh no, especially if you don't have subtools there as a visual cue. If you turn your X symmetry back on, you'll realize you're no longer sculpting down the center line. Now, there's a variety of ways that you might lose your symmetry. What's important is to understand how to get it back. So if you're simply sitting off the origin like this, one simple solution is to take your gizmo, and if you turn on your subtools, you'll see your subtools are still sitting there at the origin. What we can do is turn off our X symmetry and go to the unmasked mesh center with this button here. Then, if you click the home button, it will snap your model back to the home position. So you'll see it's now back in orientation and your X symmetry will be renewed. Now let's say you've actually moved everything off center intentionally. You're no longer at the origin, but you still want to sculpt with X symmetry. You see, if we turn on our X symmetry, we'll have to zoom out to see the other one here. It's way over there. So the solution to that is to turn on local symmetry, and that creates symmetry based on the center line of your model, not the center line of the world. However, this will not work if your model is rotated off the axis. It's only going to work if it's been translated on an axis. Now, let's say that you have been working and you thought you were working symmetrically. This is very easy to do. This happens to me all the time. I'll step down a couple subdivision levels. And let's say that I was zoomed into this shoulder and I was making changes to this shoulder and I wanted to say, adjust this spike here. Maybe I masked it out and I used a transposed line to rotate this. And I spent a whole lot of time getting this shape exactly how I wanted it, all the while thinking that I had X symmetry turned on. It's a very easy thing to miss. So if this does happen to you, don't feel like you're alone. So let's say that I've gone to all this trouble here, and maybe while I was there, I thought, oh, I think this would look better if this was raised up a little bit, and oh yeah, and then, it happens quite a bit on the hands. You get down into a hand and say, oh gosh, I think these fingertips should be more pointy. So I go to my brush menu, go to curve, turn on accurate curve mode for my move brush, and then I can grab these points, pull these points out of the fingertips. Accurate curve mode just for the move brush sharpens the brush tip, essentially. Makes it very precise, hence accurate curve mode. It forces it to follow the brush curve that's in the same menu. So about this stage, I'm zoomed in and I'm working on the thumb and I realize, oh no, this has not been done with symmetry. So this is a very easy fix. What I'll do is I'll turn off perspective with the P hotkey and I'll step down to my lowest subdivision level with Shift D. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mask the side of the model that I want to keep. Then I will go to Tool, Deformation, and there's a button here called Smart Resim. Smart Resim will look at the masked faces and then mirror the vertex position over to the other side. So if I click Smart Resim, you see it snaps those verts to the other side. Now I'm not at the highest subdivision level, so what I need to do is step up to the next subdivision level and then Smart Resim it again. Now, the reason I do this subdivision level by subdivision level is if I did this all at the top subdivision level, there'd be millions of points that ZBrush had to compare. And it slows it down and it can make it create errors. If I step up each individual subdivision level, here we go, we're at 5 next. So we have 2 more to go. Go to Deformation, Smart Resim. If I do one subdivision level at a time, it's more accurate and it's faster because it's having to compare and move fewer vertices. Let that complete. and then we will repeat it for the last subdivision level. So what this does is it allows you, if you have a model that has subdivision levels, to reestablish your object's symmetry. Now, what if you don't have subdivision levels? What if you're working in a mesh that is topologically asymmetrical? Maybe it's a dynamesh, or you're working in a dynamesh period and you don't have subdivision levels that you can step between. How do you resymmetrize your mesh? Well, Dynamesh has an even simpler way of resymmetrizing, and it's actually quite useful for creating interesting shapes and new forms. That's called mirror and weld, and we'll take a look at that now. So I will clear this mask, and I will go ahead and go to Geometry. Let's go to Dynamesh, and let's Dynamesh this model. So I'm going to Dynamesh this, and I'll say, no, I don't want to freeze my subdivision levels, and there we go. If we go into frame mode, you see we have a Dynamesh now. So let's say I run into a similar problem. Maybe I was using the move brush, and I was creating little spikes on this. And I realize at some point that I have not been working with symmetry turned on when I wanted it turned on. Well, that's no problem. What I can do is I can, on my floor plane, turn on my floor plane if it's not turned on. I will turn on the X here. You see there's an X, Y, and a Z inside this button. I'll turn on the X. Then I will take the draw menu, and there is a slider here for elevation. I'll take the elevation slider and set it to 0, and that should put it straight down the center line of the figure. Now I will go to Geometry, Modify Topology, and there is a button called Mirror and Weld. Make sure it's going across the X-axis, and then click Mirror and Weld. Now what it's done is it's mirrored this side across, so I'll undo that. And the easy thing to do here is to simply go to Deformation, and mirror. So the side I want to keep is over here. Then we'll go back to Geometry, Modify Topology, Mirror and Weld, and that mirrors that side across. So this is actually a really interesting tool for creating, interesting shapes, abstract shapes, or even strange creatures. For example, if I were to change my mirror and weld axis to Y, and then turn on my Y axis here, and then go to Draw and make sure that that's sitting at 0. And then mirror and weld along the Y-axis. You see we start getting really bizarre creations. What I want to point out, though, if we zoom in, ZBrush has essentially cut a new center line and welded those pieces together. So because it's Dynamesh, you don't have to worry about topology, you don't have to worry about subdivision levels. So it's very, very easy to go about mirror and welding something that's a Dynamesh and then restoring your symmetry. If I had, for example, a polysphere, let's change back to the gizmo. Let's change this into a polysphere. And let's stretch this out, add a couple subdivision levels, turn on my X symmetry, and maybe we'll just make some strange shapes here. And let's turn on the X here, and I'll rotate this few units that way. I don't have to have a Dynamesh. I could just go ahead and go to Modify Topology, Mirror and Weld across the X-axis, and I need to delete my lower subdivision levels. There we go, Mirror and Weld, and there we go. So this is a really neat way, I find, to kind of get interesting ideas and shapes that you didn't necessarily think of ahead of time. It's kind of like a thumbnailing tool inside of ZBrush. So I might change my mirror and weld axis to Y. There you go. So we're getting these very, very strange shapes. Maybe I will rotate this now. So let's rotate this. Let's turn off our X symmetry, and we'll center this pivot. And then let's rotate it like that. And let's mirror and weld along X again. Let's try Z. There we go. So you see you can really create some pretty bizarre shapes pretty easily using this particular tool. But its main use for me has always been to reestablish symmetry in a Dynamesh model. And I can just carry on Dynameshing from here, go back to your Dynamesh menu. It's still on. Control, click, and drag will execute Dynamesh. So if you lose symmetry when you're in a subdivision model, you can always turn on local symmetry, or you can use Smart Resim to reestablish that symmetry. So that completes this look at restoring lost symmetry in ZBrush. It's a relatively common problem. You'll run into it at some point, and hopefully now you have the tools necessary to resolve this issue if it does pop up for you in your workflow. So I will see you in the next lesson. Thanks for watching.